There's God you can't be around because his presence would destroy you, and God you can be around somehow.
I don't think that's a good interpretation.
Did Jesus claim to be God? Was the topic of a great debate that happened between Apologetics Roadshow scholar David Wood, who is best known for his harsh critiques of Islam, which you should check out, by the way, and now famed atheist Alex O'Connor, who's an Oxford philosophy guy and a YouTuber. They debated at a conference hosted by Bless God Studios not very long ago, and the debate was over 2 hours long, but was really good, and for lots of reasons. And I thought both gentlemen did a good job, and I'll explain why more in a moment, but the overall reason was they actually stuck to the topic of the debate. And this is very important if you check the whole thing out. The debate was on whether or not Jesus claimed to be God, not a debate about whether or not he is God. So they're arguing over how the Bible should be interpreted, which is interesting hearing an atheist talk about that kind of thing. I'm Brett, by the way, and I've been a pastor a long time, and at One Life Network, we love having these kind of cultural conversations because they're super important to our lives. This debate is a good example of the service we provide. We're going to try to summarize some things up and start with giving you a little taste of what both of them said, and then I'll comment along the way. This is Dave Wood.
Some of you are familiar with the early Jewish belief in the two powers in heaven. Alan Siegel, a Jewish scholar, drew attention to this in his 1977 book, Two Powers in Heaven. And lots of people, especially Christians, have been interested in the topic ever since. Here's the idea in a nutshell. The Old Testament is very clear that there's one true God. But there are numerous passages in the Old Testament where we see two divine figures. I'll give a few quick examples. There are tons of these. Sometimes God seems to be in two different places doing two different things. A common example is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. The Lord appears to Abraham and tells him that he's going down to Sodom and Gomorrah to see firsthand how bad the people are. So he goes down to Sodom and Gomorrah. And what happens? Genesis 19:24, then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. The Lord on earth rained down fire from the Lord out of heaven. This thing reboot every couple minutes. It sounds like there are two lords here. Watch what happens in Zechariah 2. Pay attention or you'll miss it. Come, Zion, escape, you who live in daughter Babylon. For this is what the Lord Almighty says. Who's speaking? The Lord Almighty. And he says, after the glorious one has sent me, the Lord was sent by the glorious one, against the nations that have plundered you, for whoever touches you touches the apple of his eye. I will surely raise my hand against them, so that their slaves will plunder them. Then you will know that the Lord Almighty has sent me. The Lord Almighty was sent by the Lord Almighty. Next paragraph. Shout and be glad, daughter Zion, for I am coming, and I will live among you, declares the Lord, Yahweh. Many nations will be joined with the Lord in that day and will become my people. I will live among you, and you will know that the Lord Almighty has sent me to you. The Lord, Yahweh, will live among them, and they will know that the Lord was sent by the Lord Almighty. So Yahweh rains down fire from Yahweh. Yahweh is sent by Yahweh. Plenty of passages like these. Then we've got a mysterious figure called the angel of the Lord. Whatever you think of when you think about angels, just get rid of that. The angel of the Lord is no ordinary angel because this angel is somehow the Lord. Angel just means messenger. In Hebrew, it can refer to a human messenger, a spirit messenger, or in this case, the Lord himself. Look at Judges 6.
Hey, I want to interject here real quick that anybody can see this. Whenever you read the Old Testament, if you just read it, you don't have to know the Hebrew or anything like that. You can watch, and it's something that will stand out to you. And I've seen it before in the stories you're about to read. This whole two powers thing is a real thing that is kind of a head scratcher when you're reading it and you don't even know what's coming. But it's something that's very important to note, and he's just kind of walking through this in a more in-depth way.
Angel of the Lord came and sat down to talk to Gideon. The angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon. Then it switches to, the Lord turned to him. The Lord answered. Then it goes back to the angel of the Lord. Then, when Gideon realized that it was the angel of the Lord, he exclaimed, alas, sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face. But the Lord said to him, peace, do not be afraid, you are not going to die. If you see the Lord in all his glory, you're dead. But if you see the angel of the Lord, who is somehow the Lord, you might survive. One more example of this. Here's Jacob blessing Joseph in Genesis 48. Then he blessed Joseph and said, "May the God before whom my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, walked faithfully, the God who has been my shepherd all my life to this day, the angel who has delivered me from all harm, may he bless these boys." He, singular. So the God, and the angel are all referring to the same being. The angel is God, but the angel is the messenger of God. This is all over the place in the Old Testament, from Genesis all the way to the prophets. We just don't pay attention to it when we're reading. But there were ancient Jews who paid very close attention to passages like these. And they realized that something very, very strange is going on. There's one God, but there were two powers, two authorities in heaven. If you put all of the passages together, it seems like there's God you can't be around because his presence would destroy you, and God you can be around somehow.
Now, that's a great summary of what he's getting at. And he continues on this way, and he makes the point that during Jesus' time, this was something that was noticed and known by rabbinic scholars. And they grappled with this issue because, again, you could see this for yourself. This isn't anything that's so far, it's not hidden from anyone. But the culture of Jesus' day would have been more accepting of this idea. This kind of thing fades off later on as Jewish scholars try to get rid of Christian influence. At the same time, Christians were trying to get rid of Jewish influence. And so it kind of fades away from that. But this is something that kind of set up the culture to entertain the idea that Jesus, as we know him, could have had these appearances as the angel of the Lord and what have you. So that's the first thing he talks about. And then I want to show you his breakdown of the 6 things that he says you can find in the New Testament, you can find in the Gospels where Jesus can be seen as God.
But did Jesus really claim to be one of the two powers in heaven? Since Jesus is a highly controversial figure, and since there's a skeptic in our midst, I would suggest that if we want to know what someone like Jesus is claiming about himself, we can look at 6 things. We can look at what Jesus says and what Jesus does, what he says and does as they relate to our topic. We can look at what his friends say and what his friends do. Here I mean what they say and do in reaction to him. And we can look at what his enemies say and what his enemies do, again, in reaction to him. So what Jesus says, what Jesus does, what his friends say, what his friends do, what his enemies say, what his enemies do,
And that's a good summary of what kind of he gets at and keeps coming back to. And he gives examples of what Jesus said about himself. He receives worship. He uses father and son language in reference to God in a special way, and these kinds of things. And obviously his enemies accused him of blasphemy. His friends, the apostles, they're the ones that wrote the early letters where they are very clear about their view of who he was. And so that's very important to remember. And so he makes that case in kind of that organized way and does a very good job with that. Now we're going to go to Alex O'Connor because I want you to hear what he had to say. And I heard people say, like, Dave Wood just mopped the floor with Alex O'Connor. When I saw it, I didn't think he did. I think Dave Wood won the debate, honestly. But at the same time, Alex O'Connor didn't do a bad job. He just kind of took another approach. And I want to give you kind of the essence of what he did. He reinterpreted these things that Jesus says, referring to himself as God, and reinterprets them around his humanity and Jesus applying it to humanity broadly speaking. And I thought one standout place was where he talked about Jesus receiving worship. Listen to this.
We're told that Jesus only rightly accepts worship. This is interesting, by the way. David flashed on a few passages of Jesus accepting worship in the Gospels. The word most commonly translated as worship in the New Testament is proskuneo, which means to bow down or prostrate before a higher authority. And of course, Jesus received this proskuneo worship, therefore he must be God. If that is the case, then we have to consider the fact that David, in the Septuagint, for example, bows down proskuneo before Esau, that Joseph's brothers proskuneo before him when he's governor of Egypt, that the entire nation of Israel offers proskuneo worship to King David as well, that Lot proskuneo before to angels. Proskuneo is littered throughout the Old and also the New Testament, by the way. In the parable of the unmerciful servant, when one of the servants returns, he offers proskuneo to his master. And this is a story that Jesus is saying. Also, let's not forget that in Revelation, Jesus promises that his true followers, their enemies, will proskuneo, worship before them. Jesus himself in Revelation is saying that human beings will receive proskuneo worship. If proskuneo worship is something that only God can receive, then all of these people sinned. All of them. The entire assembly of Israel sinned when they bowed down before David. I don't think that's a good interpretation. There is another word that's sometimes translated as worship, which is latruo. This is religious cultic worship that is only offered to God. Nowhere in the Gospels is this offered to Jesus.
Now, he kind of goes along this way, and he kind of comes at the different claims from these angles and reinterprets that, which, again, I think that was a strong suit thing, and it probably ought to sharpen our ideas about what did it mean when Jesus received worship versus when he did not. Dave Wood answers that by talking about context. You can pick up a lot from the context itself, and you find that happening a lot between the two as they go. And again, I would encourage you to check it out. But here's the problem that I found most often with Alex O'Connor, and David Wood brings this up. Alex O'Connor does reinterpret some of these imageries of father and son relationships and worship and all these things, and it really kind of lands Jesus where he really just comes across as a human being talking to other human beings, to the point where Dave Wood says, okay, what are you going to do with Jesus? Basically, you're saying that he didn't claim to be God, he claimed to be just a regular dude. And Alex O'Connor denies that, but in the end, that's kind of the way it comes across, is, okay, so Jesus, in the end, Alex O'Connor calls him the ultimate faithful one, the ultimate example of living a godly life or something like that. But that gets into the first key idea that I think Alex O'Connor is fundamentally guilty of, and that's what I want to call a forest tree problem. He goes after the tree of this individual worship word and things like that, but he overlooks the forest of the entire New Testament, the early church, the church fathers, church history, and everything else, where unmistakably Jesus is viewed as unique, Jesus is viewed as extraordinary, Jesus is viewed as divine even by heretics themselves trying to interpret how he's divine. The special birth, the special life, the miracles, the fact that he can control storms, all these kinds of things. It was never in question whether or not Jesus was divine in some way. And then when you look at the epistles, they are the ones that talk about how he is the creator. He is God in the flesh. And that brings up the critical thing that has to be understood about this entire issue, is that the reason Jesus couldn't go along and call himself God, he didn't go around and say, I'm God, I'm God, I'm Yahweh, I'm Yahweh. It's because that's technically not his identity. I'd invite you to watch this video we did about this when Alex O'Connor made this claim in front of 20 different Christians. Check that out because we go a little bit deeper with that. But the bottom line comes down to, there was an essay that C.S. Lewis wrote that helped me a lot when it comes to this kind of thing, that modern scholars, they'll go back and they'll say, if you really look at this, the early church really misunderstood what he was saying. He was really talking about humanity. He was really talking about himself, not as divine or otherwise, whereas it's no question early followers obviously thought of him as divine and as God himself walking around the flesh. But we understand him better. Here's a quote from C.S. Lewis where he writes about this. And remember, C.S. Lewis he didn't consider himself a theologian. He was a literary critic. He was someone that understood literature. And when you read the literature of the New Testament, it's unmistakable that Jesus is who he claims to be. Lewis writes this: all theology of the liberal type involves at some point, and often involves throughout, the claim that the real behavior and purpose and teaching of Christ came very rapidly to be misunderstood and misrepresented by his followers, and has been recovered and exhumed only by modern scholars. The idea that any man or writer should be opaque, meaning unclear, to those who lived in the same culture, spoke the same language, shared the same habitual imagery and unconscious assumptions, and yet be transparent to those who have none of these advantages is, in my opinion, preposterous. There is an a priori improbability in it, which is almost no argument and no evidence could counterbalance. And that's what happens if you go back and look at the debate, which I encourage you to do. Think of that line and then remember this: Jesus was, his favorite title of himself was Son of Man. And when you see the Son of Man in Daniel, it's absolutely talking about a divine and human figure at the same time. He's not just God straight on. He is fully God, fully man. And when you plug that in, it all makes sense. And everything that happens in the Gospels does make sense. And that's why it was passed on in the history of the church. I hope that helps on this. See you next time.